The International Brigades were military units, made up of volunteers from different countries, who traveled to Spain, in order to fight for the Second Spanish Republic, in the Spanish Civil War, between 1936 and 1939. The number of combatant volunteers has been estimated at between 32,000 to 35,000, though with no more than about 20,000 active at any one time. A further 10,000 people probably participated in non-combatant roles, and about 3,000 to 5,000 foreigners were members of CNT or POUM. They came from a claimed 53 nations to fight against the Spanish Falangist forces led by General Francisco Franco, who was assisted by German and Italian forces. Formation and recruitment. Using foreign communist parties to recruit volunteers for Spain was first proposed in the Soviet Union in September 1936 apparently at the suggestion of Maurice Thurzo by William I Kortensenberg, chief of Comintern propaganda for Western Europe. As a security measure, non-communist volunteers would first be interviewed by an NKVD agent. By the end of September, the Italian and French Communist parties had decided to set up a column. Luigi Longo, ex-leader of the Italian Communist Youth, was charged to make the necessary arrangements with the Spanish government. The Soviet Ministry of Defense also helped, since they had experience of dealing with Corps of International Volunteers during the Russian Civil War. The idea was initially opposed by Largo Caballero, but after the first setbacks of the war, he changed his mind, and finally agreed to the operation on October 22. However, the Soviet Union did not withdraw from the Non-Intervention Committee, probably to avoid diplomatic conflict with France and the United Kingdom. The main recruitment center was in Paris, under the supervision of Soviet Colonel Karol Walter Schwieszewski. On October 17, 1936, an open letter by Joseph Stalin to José Copyright da House was published in Mundo Obrero, arguing that victory for the Spanish Second Republic was a matter not only for Spaniards, but also for the whole of progressive humanity. In a matter of days, support organizations for the Spanish Republic were founded in most countries, all more or less controlled by the Comintern. Entry to Spain was arranged for volunteers. For instance, a Yugoslav, Josip Broz, who would become famous as Marshal Josip Broz Tito, was in Paris to provide assistance, money and passports for volunteers from Eastern Europe. Volunteers were sent by train or ship from France to Spain, and sent to the base at Albast. However, many of them also went by themselves to Spain. The volunteers were under no contract, nor defined engagement period, which would later prove a problem. Also many Italians, Germans, and people from other countries joined the movement, with the idea that combat in Spain was a first step to restore democracy or advance a revolutionary cause in their own country. There were also many unemployed workers, and adventurers. Finally, some 500 communists who had been exiled to Russia were sent to Spain. The operation was met by communists with enthusiasm, but by anarchists with skepticism, at best. At first, the anarchists who controlled the borders with France were told to refuse communist volunteers, and reluctantly allowed their passage after protests. A group of 500 volunteers arrived in Albast on October 14, 1936. They were met by international volunteers who had already been fighting in Spain, Germans from the Currency LMANN Battalion, Italians from Centuria Gastone Sozzi and French from Commune de Paris Battalion. Among them was British poet John Cornford. Men were sorted according to their experience and origin, and dispatched to units. Albast soon became the International Brigades headquarters and its main depot. It was run by a troika of Comintern heavyweights. Andrew Copyright Marti was commander. Luigi Longo was Inspector General. And Giuseppe Di Vittorio was Chief Political Commissar. The French Communist Party provided uniforms for the brigades. They were organized into mixed brigades, the basic military unit of the Republican People's Army. Discipline was extreme. For several weeks, the brigades were locked in their base while their strict military training was underway. Service equals first engagements, Siege of Madrid equals. The Battle of Madrid was a major success for the Republic. it staved off the prospect of a rapid defeat at the hands of Francisco Franco's forces. The role of the International Brigades in this victory was generally recognized, but was exaggerated by Comintern propaganda, so that the outside world heard only of their victories, and not those of Spanish units. So successful was such propaganda that the British ambassador, Sir Henry Chiltern, declared that there were no Spaniards in the army which had defended Madrid. The International Brigade forces that fought in Madrid arrived after other successful Republican fighting. Of the 40,000 Republican troops in the city, the foreign troops numbered less than 3,000. Even though the International Brigades did not win the battle by themselves, nor significantly change the situation, they certainly did provide an example by their determined fighting, and improved the morale of the population by demonstrating the concern of other nations in the fight. Many of the older members of the International Brigades provided valuable combat experience, having fought during the First World War and the Irish War of Independence. One of the strategic positions in Madrid was the Casa De Campo. There the nationalist troops were Moroccans, commanded by General José Copyright Enrique Vela. They were stopped by 3 and 4 brigades of the Spanish Republican Army. On November 9, 1936, the 11th International Brigade, comprising 1,900 men from the Edgar André Copyright Battalion, the Commune de Paris Battalion and the Dabrowski Battalion, together with a British machine gun company took up position at the Casa de Campo. In the evening, its commander, General Copyright Bear, launched an assault on the nationalist positions. This lasted for the whole night and part of the next morning. At the end of the fight, the nationalist troops had been forced to retreat, abandoning all hopes of a direct assault on Madrid by Casa de Campo, while the 5th Brigade had lost a third of its personnel. On November 13, the 1,550-man-strong 12th International Brigade, made up of the Focurrency LMANN Battalion, the Garibaldi Battalion and the André Copyright Martí Battalion, deployed. Commanded by General Lukács, they assaulted nationalist positions on the high ground of Cerro de Los Angeles. As a result of language and communication problems, command issues, lack of rest, poor coordination with armored units, and insufficient artillery support, the attack failed. On November 19, the anarchist militias were forced to retreat, and nationalist troops Moroccans and Spanish Foreign Legionnaires, covered by the Nazi Condor Legion captured a foothold in the university city. The 11th Brigade was sent to drive the nationalists out of the university city. The battle was extremely bloody, a mix of artillery and aerial bombardment, with bayonet and grenade fights, room by room. Anarchist leader Buenaventura Durruti was shot there on November 19, 1936, and died the next day. The battle in the university went on until 3/4 of the university city was under nationalist control. Both sides then started setting up trenches and fortifications. It was then clear that any assault from either side would be far too costly. The nationalist leaders had to renounce the idea of a direct assault on Madrid, and prepare for a siege of the capital. On December 13, 1936, 18,000 nationalist troops attempted an attack to close the encirclement of Madrid at Guadarrama, an engagement known as the Battle of the Corunna Road. The Republicans sent in a Soviet armored unit, under General Dmitry Pavlov, and both 11 and 12 International Brigades. Violent combat followed, and they stopped the nationalist advance. An attack was then launched by the Republic on the Kharkiv-Doba front. The battle ended in a form of stalemate. A communiqué was issued, saying, "Today, our advance continued without loss of land." Poets Ralph Winston Fox and John Cornford were killed. Eventually, the nationalists advanced, taking the hydroelectric station at El Campo. André Copyright Martí accused the commander of the Marseillaise Battalion, Gaston de la Salle, of espionage and treason and had him executed. Further nationalist attempts after Christmas to encircle Madrid met with failure, but not without extremely violent combat. On January 6, 1937, the Focurrency LMANN Battalion arrived at Las Rosas, and held its positions until it was destroyed as a fighting force. On January 9, only 10 kilometers had been lost to the nationalists, When the 13 International Brigade and 14 International Brigade and the 1st British Company arrived in Madrid. Violent Republican assaults were launched in attempt to retake the land, with little success. On January 15, trenches and fortifications were built by both sides, resulting in a stalemate. The Nationalists did not take Madrid until the very end of the war, in March 1939, when they marched in unopposed. There were some pockets of resistance during the consecutive months. Battle of Jarama. On February 6, 1937, following the fall of Málaga, the Nationalists launched an attack on the Madrid-Andalusia road, south of Madrid. The Nationalists quickly advanced on the little town Ciempozuelos, held by the 15 International Brigade, which was composed of the British Battalion, the Dimitrov Battalion, the 6th Far Copyright Rehab Battalion, the Canadian Mackenzie Papineau Battalion and the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. An independent 80-men-strong Irish unit, known as the Connolly Column, made up of people from both sides of the Irish border also fought. Several histories of the Irish in Spain record that they included an ex-Catholic Christian brother and an ordained Church of Ireland clergyman, fighting and dying on the same side. On February 11, 1937, a nationalist brigade launched a surprise attack on the Andhra Copyright Marti Battalion, stabbing its sentries and crossing the Jarama. The Garibaldi Battalion stopped the advance with heavy fire. At another point, the same tactic allowed the nationalists to move their troops across the river. On February 12, the British Battalion, 15 International Brigade took the brunt of the attack, remaining under heavy fire for 7 hours. The position became known as Suicide Hill. At the end of the day, only 225 of the 600 members of the British Battalion remained. One company was captured by ruse, when nationalists advanced among their ranks singing the Internationale. On February 17, the Republican Army counterattacked. On February 23 and 27, the International Brigades were engaged, but with little success. The Lincoln Battalion was put under great pressure, with no artillery support. It suffered 120 killed and 175 wounded. Amongst the dead was the Irish poet Charles Donnelly and Leo Green. There were heavy casualties on both sides, and although both claimed victory, both suffered defeats. It resulted in a stalemate, with both sides digging in, creating elaborate trench systems. On February 22, 1937, the League of Nations Non-Intervention Committee ban on foreign volunteers went into effect. Battle of Guadalajara. After the failed assault on the Jarama, the nationalists attempted another assault on Madrid, from the northeast this time. The objective was the town of Guadalajara, 50 kilometers from Madrid. The whole Italian Expeditionary Corps, 35,000 men, with 80 battle tanks and 200 field artillery, was deployed, as Benito Mussolini wanted the victory to be credited to Italy. On March 9, 1937, the Italians made a breach in the Republican lines, but did not properly exploit the advance. However, the rest of the Nationalist Army was advancing, and the situation appeared critical for the Republicans. A formation drawn from the best available units of the Republican Army, including the 11 and 12 International Brigades, was quickly assembled. At dawn on March 10, the Nationalists closed in, and by noon, the Garibaldi Battalion counterattacked. Some confusion arose from the fact that the sides were not aware of each other's movements, and that both sides spoke Italian. This resulted in scouts from both sides exchanging information without realizing they were enemies. The Republican lines advanced and made contact with 11 International Brigade. Nationalist tanks were shot at and infantry patrols came into action. On March 11, the Nationalist Army broke the front of the Republican Army. The Currency LMANN Battalion suffered heavy losses, but succeeded in holding the Trijuque-Torreja road. The Garibaldi also held its positions. On March 12, Republican planes and tanks attacked. The Currency LMANN Battalion attacked Triuit in a bayonet charge and retook the town, capturing numerous prisoners. The International Brigades also saw combat in the Battle of Teruel in January 1938. The 35th International Division suffered heavily in this battle from aerial bombardment as well as shortages of food, winter clothing and ammunition. The 14th International Brigade fought in the Battle of Bro in July 1938, the last Republican offensive of the war. Casualties, although exact figures are not available, an estimated 5,857 to 25,229 brigadiers died in Spain, of an estimated 23,670 to 59,380 who served, with estimated death rates of 16.7% to 29.2%. These high casualty rates are blamed on lack of training, poor leadership and use as shock troops. Disbandment. In October 1938, at the height of the Battle of the Bro, the Non-Intervention Committee ordered the withdrawal of the international brigades which were fighting on the Republican side. The Republican government of Juan Negrin announced the decision in the League of Nations on September 21, 1938. The disbandment was part of an ill-advised effort to get the nationalists' foreign backers to withdraw their troops and to persuade the Western democracies such as France and Britain to end their arms embargo on the Republic. By this time there were about an estimated 10,000 foreign volunteers still serving in Spain for the Republican side, and about 50,000 foreign conscripts for the nationalists. Perhaps half of the international brigadists came from Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy or other countries, such as Hungary, which had authoritarian right-wing governments at the time. These men could not safely return home and some were instead given honorary Spanish citizenship and integrated into Spanish units of the Popular Army. The remainder were repatriated to their own countries. The Belgian and Dutch volunteers lost their citizenship because they had served in a foreign army. Composition. Overview. The 1st Brigades were composed mostly of French, Belgian, Italian, and German volunteers, backed by a sizable contingent of Polish miners from northern France and Belgium. The XIth, XIV and XIth were the 1st Brigades formed. Later, the XIVTH and XVTH Brigades were raised, mixing experienced soldiers with new volunteers. Smaller brigades the 86th, 129th and 150th, were formed in late 1937 and 1938, mostly for temporary tactical reasons. About 32,000 people volunteered to defend the Spanish Republic. Many were veterans of World War I. Their early engagements in 1936 during the Siege of Madrid amply demonstrated their military and propaganda value. The international volunteers were mainly socialists, communists, or under communist authority, and a high proportion were Jewish. Some were involved in the fighting in Barcelona against Republican opponents of the Communists, the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification and anarchists. These more libertarian groups like the POUM fought together on the front with the anarchist federations of the CNT and the FAI who had large support in the area of Catalonia. However, overseas volunteers from anarchist, socialist, liberal and other political positions also served with the international brigades. To simplify communication, the battalions usually concentrated people of the same nationality or language group. The battalions were often named after inspirational people or events. From spring 1937 onwards, many battalions contained one Spanish volunteer company. Later in the war, military discipline tightened and learning Spanish became mandatory. By decree of September 23, 1937, the international brigades formally became units of the Spanish Foreign Legion. This made them subject to the Spanish Code of Military Justice. However, the Spanish Foreign Legion itself sided with the nationalists throughout the coup and the Civil War. The same decree also specified that non-Spanish officers in the brigades should not exceed Spanish ones by more than 50%. MKVD created in 1937 a Euro-Control and Security Service Euro unregistered trademark. Non-Spanish battalions Abraham Lincoln Battalion, from the United States, Canada and Irish Free State, with some British, Cypriots and Chileans who lived in New York and were members of the Chilean Worker Club of New York. Connolly Column, this mostly Irish Republican group fought as a section of the Lincoln Battalion. Mikołajich Battalion, predominantly Polish. Andrew Copyright Marty Battalion, predominantly French and Belgian, named after André Copyright Marty. British Battalion, mainly British but with many from the Irish Free State, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Cyprus and other Commonwealth countries. Czecho-Balkanico Battalion, Czechoslovakian and Balkan. Commune de Paris Battalion, predominantly French. Debra-Blagojev Battalion, predominantly Bulgarian, later merged into the Jakovic Battalion. Dimitrov Battalion, Greek, Yugoslavian, Bulgarian, Czechoslovakian, Hungarian and Romanian. Named after Georgy Dimitrov. Juro-Jakovic Battalion, Yugoslav, Bulgarian, anarchist, named for former Yugoslav Communist Party Secretary Juro Akovic. Dąbrowski Battalion, mostly Polish and Hungarian. Also Czechoslovakian, Ukrainian, Bulgarian and Palestinian Jews. See also Dąbrowski. Edgar André Copyright Battalion, mostly German. Also Austrian, Yugoslavian, Bulgarian, Albanian, Romanian, Danish, Swedish, Norwegian and Dutch. Aspar +or-Ol Battalion, Mexican, Cuban, Puerto Rican, Chilean, Argentine and Bolivian. Fleo Battalion, mostly Italian. Later merged with the Garibaldi Battalion. Garibaldi Battalion, raised as the Hitler Aspar +or-Ol Battalion and renamed. Mostly Italian and Spanish, but contained some Albanians. George Washington Battalion, the 2nd U.S. Battalion. Later merged with the Lincoln Battalion, to form the Lincoln-Washington Battalion. Hans Beimler Battalion, mostly German. Later merged with the Thurcurency LMANN Battalion. Henri Barbus Battalion, predominantly French. Henri Vauban Battalion, predominantly French. Louise Michel Battalions, French-speaking, later merged with the Henri Vauban Battalion. Mackenzie Europa Pioneer Battalion, the MacPaps, predominantly Canadian. Marseillaise Battalion, predominantly French commanded by George Nathan. Incorporated one separate British company. Palafox Battalion, Yugoslavian, Polish, Czechoslovakian, Hungarian, Jewish and French. Naftali Botwin Company, a Jewish unit formed within the Palafox Battalion in December 1937. Pierre Braquet Battalion, mostly French. Rákosi Battalion, mainly Hungarian, also Czechoslovakians, Ukrainians, Poles, Chinese, Mongolians and Palestinian Jews. Nine Nations Battalion, also known as the Sans Noms and Neuf Nationalité Copyright S, French, Belgian, Italian, German, Austrian, Dutch, Danish, Swiss and Polish. 6 Far Copyright Rila Battalion, French, Belgian, Moroccan, Algerian, Libyan, Syrian, Iranian, Iraqi, Chinese, Japanese, Indian and Palestinian Jewish. Thurcurency LMANN Battalion, predominantly German, named after German communist leader Ernst Thurcurency LMANN. Tom Mann Centuria, a small, mostly British, group who operated as a section of the Thurcurency LMANN Battalion. Thomas Masaryk Battalion, mostly Czechoslovakian. Trapalev Battalion, composed of 21 nationalities. Vaillant Couturier Battalion, French, Belgian, Czechoslovakian, Bulgarian, Swedish, Norwegian and Danish. Vaillant Battalion, American, British, Italian, Yugoslavian and Bulgarian. Zwar Paragraph LFTE Februar Battalion, mostly Austrian. Compagnie des Zeven Provinciën, Dutch. Brigadiers by country of origin. Status after the war. Since the Civil War was eventually won by the Nationalists, the Brigadiers were initially on the wrong side of history, especially since most of their home countries had a right-wing government. However, since most of these countries found themselves at war with the very powers which had been supporting the Nationalists, the Brigadists gained some prestige as the first guard of the democracies, having fought a prophetical combat. Retrospectively, it was clear that the war in Spain was as much a precursor of the Second World War as a Spanish Civil War. Some glory was therefore accredited to the volunteers, but this soon faded in the fear that it would promote communism. An exception is among groups to the left of the communist parties, for example anarchists. Among these groups the brigades, or at least their leadership, are criticized for their alleged role in suppressing the Spanish Revolution. An example of a modern work which promotes this view is Ken Loach's film Land and Freedom. A well-known contemporary account of the Spanish Civil War which also takes this view is George Orwell's book Homage to Catalonia. East Germany Germany was of course undivided until after the Second World War. At that time, the new German Democratic Republic found itself in need of a founding myth going beyond the conquest of Eastern Nazi Germany by the Red Army. The Spanish Civil War, and especially the role of the International Brigades, were considered ideal, and became a substantial part of East Germany's memorial rituals, because of the substantial numbers of German communists who had served in the brigades. Canada Survivors of the Mackenzie Papineau Battalion were often investigated by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and denied employment when they returned to Canada. Some were prevented from serving in the military during the Second World War due to political unreliability. In 1995 a monument to veterans of the war was built near Ontario's provincial parliament. On February 12, 2000, a bronze statue The Spirit of the Republic based on an original poster from the Spanish Republic, by sculptor Jacques Harmon, was placed on the grounds of the BC Legislature. And in 2001, the few remaining Canadian veterans of the Spanish Civil War dedicated a monument to Canadian members of the International Brigades in Ottawa's Green Park. Switzerland In Switzerland, public sympathy was high for the Republican cause, but the federal government banned all fundraising and recruiting activities a month after the start of the war so as to preserve Swiss neutrality. Around 800 Swiss volunteers joined the International Brigades, among them a small number of women. 60% of Swiss volunteers identified as communists, while the others included socialists, anarchists and anti-fascists. Some 170 Swiss volunteers were killed in the war. The survivors were tried by military courts upon their return to Switzerland for violating the criminal prohibition on foreign military service. The courts pronounced 420 sentences which ranged from around 2 weeks to 4 years in prison, and often also stripped the convicts of their political rights. In the judgment of Swiss historian Mauro Cerruti, volunteers were punished more harshly in Switzerland than in any other democratic country. Motions to pardon the Swiss brigadists on the account that they fought for a just cause have been repeatedly introduced in the Swiss federal parliament. A first such proposal was defeated in 1939 on neutrality grounds. In 2002, Parliament again rejected a pardon of the Swiss war volunteers, with a majority arguing that they did break a law that remains in effect to this day. In March 2009, Parliament adopted a third bill of pardon, retroactively rehabilitating Swiss brigadists, only a handful of whom were still alive. United Kingdom On disbandment, 305 British volunteers left Spain. They arrived at Victoria Station on December 7, to be met by a crowd of supporters including Clement Attlee, Stafford Cripps, Willie Gallacher, and Will Lawther. United States In the United States, the returned volunteers were labeled premature anti-fascists by the FBI, denied promotion during service in the U.S. military during World War II, and pursued by congressional committees during the Red Scare of 1947 to 1957. However, threats of loss of citizenship were not carried out. Recognition Spain On January 26, 1996, the Spanish government gave Spanish citizenship to the brigadists. At the time, roughly 600 remained. At the end of 1938, Prime Minister Juan Negrín had promised Spanish citizenship to the brigadists, which citizenship was of course not recognized by the nationalists who were about to take over the entire country. France In 1996, Jacques Chirac, then French president, granted the former French members of the International Brigades the legal status of former service personnel following the request of 2 French communist members of parliament, Lefort and de Sency, both children of volunteers. Before 1996, the same request was turned down several times including by François Mitterrand, the former socialist president. Monuments. There is a full list of British and Irish monuments on the International Brigade Memorial Trust's website. Symbolism and Heraldry. The International Brigades were inheritors of a socialist aesthetic. The flags featured the colours of the Spanish Republic, red, yellow and purple, often along with socialist symbols. The emblem of the brigades themselves was the three-pointed red star, which is often featured. Notable associated people. Note, not all the following were International Brigade members. See also, foreign involvement in the Spanish Civil War, International Brigade Memorial Trust, militant anti-fascism, Irish Socialist Volunteers in the Spanish Civil War, Arditi del Popolo, Nationalist Foreign Volunteers, Moscow Gold, Red Terror. References. Sources: Alvarez, Santiago. Historia Política y Militar de las Brigadas Internacionales Madrid, Campo +o-a Literaria, 1996. Anderson, James W. The Spanish Civil War, A History and Reference Guide. Santa Barbara, Greenwood Press, 2003. ISBN 978-0-313-32274-7, Baxil, Richard. Unlikely Warriors, The British in the Spanish Civil War and the Struggle Against Fascism. London, Aurum Press Limited. Pages 400. ISBN 1845136977. Beaver, Anthony. 1982, The Spanish Civil War. Reissued London, Weidenfeld and Nicholson, 1999. ISBN 978-0-304-35281-4. Beaver, Anthony. The Battle for Spain, The Spanish Civil War 1936–1939. London, Weidenfeld and Nicholson, 2006. ISBN 978-0-297-84832-5. Bradley, Ken. International Brigades in Spain 1936–39 with Mike Chappell, published by Elite. ISBN 978-1,855,323,674. Good basic introduction to the subject in a readable and well-illustrated format. Author made several visits to battlefields and interviewed veterans in the 1980s and 90s. Unregistered trademark S. Castells, Andrew. Las Brigadas Internacionales en la Guerra de España +o-a. Barcelona, Editorial Ariel, 1974. Copeman, Fred. Reason in Revolt. London, Blandford Press, 1948. Eby, Cecil. Comrades and Commissars. Pennsylvania, Penn State University Press, 2007. ISBN 978-0-271-02910-8, Gurney, Jason. Crusade in Spain. London, Faber, 1974. ISBN 978-0-571-10310-2, Kantorowicz, Alfred, Spanisches Tagebuch, Madrid, Berlin. Kayulai, O. Riri, V. Ut, O. Hispania Tools. Mar Currency Lestasijar document for Esmivastasist var Micronite Lugist Hispanias 1936-1939. Astel. Deline, Ernesti Ramat. Lefebvre, Michel. Skautelski, Ra. Copyright me. Las Brigadas Internacionales. Barcelona, Lundberg Editors. ISBN 84-7782-000-7, Orwell, George. 1938, A Homage to Catalonia. London, Penguin Books, 1969. ISBN 978-0-14-001699-4, Thomas, Hugh. The Spanish Civil War. London, Aaron Spottiswoode, 1961. Thomas, Hugh. The Spanish Civil War, 2003. London, Penguin, 2003. ISBN 978-0-14-101161-5. Wainwright, John, L. The Last to Fall, The Life and Letters of Ivor Hickman, an International Brigadier in Spain. Southampton, Hatchet Green Publishing. ISBN 978-0-9568372-1-9, Spanish Civil War drew 4,000 Britons to fight fascism. London, BBC News June 27, 2011. Retrieved June 28, 2011. External links, IBMT The International Brigade Memorial Trust, Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives, reproduction of International Brigades flags, badges and T-shirts, Freedom Fighters or Comintern Army? The International Brigades in Spain by Andy Durgan, International Solidarity with the Spanish Republic, 1936–1939, Documents on the International Brigades from Trabajadores, the Spanish Civil War through the eyes of organized labor, a digitized collection of more than 13,000 pages of documents from the archives of the British Trades Union Congress held in the Modern Records Centre, University of Warwick, Media, ASOASA Free FR, English.uc.edu.